I feel like my face is incredibly tired. I could be wrong though. That's just the feeling I get. Let's see. So today, the plan is to continue with the Godot things that I started last week. And the base of the things, despite there not really being a whole lot to begin with, the base of that little scene, I guess, was the fact that there was based off of a YouTube tutorial series that's actually in the process of being made and not necessarily fully out there yet. So, the most recent, I guess, like part of the tutorial just came out yesterday. So, I'll be going through that. Just from the title alone, it seems like it's just going to be going through some basic programming principles, which is fine. And another difference is that it will be going through in GD script, which is Godot, the game engine that we're using. Godot's native language, or I guess custom language. I will be using C sharp and just kind of adapting things from there. Godot is similar to Python if you've ever done that before. Um, so a lot of things should be fairly similar. It's just the structure of it. There's nothing wrong with using the GD script or the native language for Godot. I, like I mentioned before, I program in C sharp for my day job, and so I figured that doing C sharp as part of Godot would probably be easier, and that C sharp would give me more control down the road. Um, just getting used to it because um, GD script will have kind of like built-in features that basically come out as like code chunks, and I may want to tweak those specific features and inevitably start making just my own functions instead. So C sharp will just be easier to do that from the get go and just really slim down the processing to exactly what I want rather than just kind of like this generalized version. But yeah, so that's going to be what we're going through today. So I'll have the video up on screen. It'll be in the lower right hand of the stream. Not too big, but doesn't really need to be unless you guys really want to follow along. I mean, you have 3 videos to catch up on. Although, to be fair, the first couple lessons, it's not that it takes a long time to get through them. It's just that he tries to explain things in a very clear manner, and he does a good job of it. Um, I guess I could post the uh link to the video in chat. It is what I'm following, so in the event that you guys want to, I guess, try and follow along, um, Godot is the game engine. That link is the kind of like is the YouTube tutorial that I'm following at the moment. And again, this isn't going to be like the end all be all tutorial. This is just getting back into Godot because I did do some things in Godot. I did an older version of Godot sometime like last year or 2 years ago. So it's been a minute. And I just figured it's best to start from scratch. And just if I happen to remember the things faster than what the video is playing out, cool beans. Don't sweat it. Um, yeah. So gonna be going through that, and we'll see how that plays out. Again, seeing as how it's primarily are going to be like coding principles. Probably not going to be doing anything actively in Godot, except for maybe just touching up some of the code that I messed with last time. And um, so it's probably going to be more so just kind of like a watch party, I guess you could say. We'll see though. I guess that's enough for like the intro things. And as for things going forward, um, yeah, I guess another thing to say is that The tutorial is designed to create a 3D platformer. If any of you clicked on the link, it's designed to create a 3D platformer. Wide bow. Nice. Howdy, howdy, Hellrith. So their goal is to create a 3D platformer. Obviously, the games that I want to make aren't all going to be 3D platformers. This is just how to make a game, period. And we'll see how that ends up being. And then I do have like other tutorials that are more my brain's small. No, 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 no. Your brain is just as big as it needs to be, hell with. Um, yeah, the I do have another tutorial kind of like picked out that'll be covering more of like the multiplayer networking aspects of Godot. Because apparently that's incredibly simplified compared to other game engines, which is good to hear. Because I would like to make multiplayer games, but not the type of, oh, we're gonna have 100-player battle royale, or like 64v64 PvP team deathmatch. Now, much prefer the idea of doing something just like grab a group of friends, if you have any, and just load in as a party and just experience the world together cooperatively. Some good old fashioned PvE with friends. 64v64 v64 objective siege. No. Get that world v world out of here. We don't need that. I mean, like, and this would be a very, like, this would probably be like 20 years down the road or something if I do actually manage to take off with game development and I actually have charge of my own projects. Um, Doing an MMO style game. But that's a rough market to to get into. To really try and set yourself apart. Um and kind of cater to some audience. I don't know what I would, because the main thing that comes to me when I think about doing MMO stuff is that I want there to be actual world events. Look, my fortune cookie said I have the ability to nurture creativity. Did you get Chinese? Um, I want to make an MMO that actually has world events to where, um, depending on the player base's participation in the event and the outcome of said event, will direct the direction of the game's story. And so, obviously, it'll be kind of like a mass vote system to where, yeah, bruh, look, I'm sure people have already done that before, but I just think that'd be a lot more interesting because it's like, here's this projective outcome. We need to have a chat later. A chat later? Oh no, I'm gonna be pulled aside into the principal's office. Uh, but it's just it's because you may have seen like those like fictional works about MMOs where they have all these crazy things that go on. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but realistically, MMOs always typically follow a design pattern, and that's just kind of how it is and how it ends up being. But I like the idea of, if you happen to be present and you actually participate in the events, you can direct the world to some degree. I gotta tell you about the Ramparts TM. But yeah, that was just like one of the things I was thinking about. It's like, if I were to make an MMO, the way to try and like set it apart from others and kind of give it more marketability. Um, I know some up and coming MMOs that are currently in development, such as like Ashes of Creations, are trying to do like a whole player driven economy and territory type deal. we'll see how that plays out. And don't get me wrong, like if Ash's Creations can pull it off and pull it off well, like I'm all for it, 100%. But knowing what players can be like, there's going to be immaculate amount of gatekeeping. MMO economies are always player driven. Games just never admits it. I mean, yeah, because in nowhere do the devs decide like auction house prices or everything, or what goes into the auction houses, or what becomes a hot commodity. Like, sure, you may need certain ingredients in order or materials to get X, Y, and Z, but as for how many people actually farm for those items, and who puts them up for sale, and if anyone tries to get a monopoly, etc., etc. All this controls the rate and usability of materials. Yeah, yeah. And another thing is, I would like the MMO to play similarly to Monster Hunter, because I think those types of fights are a lot more interesting. Obviously, though, that requires a lot more accurate hit registration on everyone's part, and it would make the combat more skill based. And so I'm not sure how the long term progression would be. So that would be difficult. That would require a lot more planning. Um, and yeah, just the whole, how do you connect, hundreds of players and have them all accurately hit this one thing? Obviously, maybe not at the same time, but we should really talk about the Ramparts TM like later. I'm actually just reading off the Ramparts webpage or something, just and they should totally at uh there isn't a webpage. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. There is a bunch of Sharpie on the wall though. Yeah. It's just trying to figure out things that would specifically add something new to the MMO genre. And I played a lot of various types of MMOs. Some really fun. Some uh, some are just uh and so, as an individual I have my likes and dislikes and what I wish to see in an MMO. But as to whether or not those things are feasible and kind of like the task. And again, like I said, this would be something that is like 20 years down the road, something I would aim to be my my magnum opus type of deal. Because I feel like that is the pinnacle of an RPG adventure, but not weighing it down so much that either A, the story doesn't feel compelling, like how it did for World of Warcraft whenever I was going through those quest lines. I just could not feel bothered. Or be be a bit too overloaded or engrossed, because there were some parts in Star Wars: The Old Republic where it was just like back to back cutscenes, and the problem with those is that it's they're really emphasizing the whole like player choice for the dialogues and everything, which is really cool. Don't get me wrong. Or 400 hours like at Final Fantasy 14, yeah. And so it's trying to find that balance, because it's MMORPG. You want to experience the role playing part of it, because otherwise it just becomes an RPG is more than just here is a class and level it up. There we go. That's what I want to say. RPG is more than just class based, level based grinding. they're I like it when they're do be story. But you also have to make a choice because the MMO part. Yeah, and one of those choices would be like those world events, which I don't know like how that go. Also, I would love it if like nearing like the end of like the creativity cycle or the are you here or are you one of the many heroes? Yeah. I like the idea of just like if the MMO is reaching the end of its cycle, we have one final event that literally decides the fate of the game. And obviously, this would be absolutely bonkers to do because it would make so many people upset. But just like if they do not, like complete the event in order to save the world, the MMO just gets fucking deleted. The servers are gone. It'd be such a madman thing to do, but boy, would that be satisfying. Oh, for freaking Final Fantasy, yeah. Too many people failed the last event, and then boom. Yeah. And of course, like, and for those events, I also wanted to not be this one singular goal, you know? Because I would like it to be, um, say there is like an oncoming like war fronts and like monsters are attacking in hordes. You have the main battlefront, which you'd send like your obvious frontliners, kind of bulk of the infantry, etc., etc. But then you know some of the monsters slip through cracks, and then you have like the individual villages that may also need protecting, and so you can defend in smaller groups if you don't have like a big guild to delegate to some of the smaller settlements, and if those settlements are protected, then those settlements are gone permanently, kind of deal. Things that happen in the world event are permanent. I like the idea, but I just so that it gives people a bit more choice in how they participate in such a big event that is supposed to have impact. I would like that to be something more seen in the whole MMO space. But again, I lack the necessary knowledge and skills to put something like that into fruition at the moment. Should really turn off that camera in my room. It's almost like we have very similar taste in video games or something. It's almost like we have this thing in common that makes it really easy for us to get along or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird. there's just a lot of wants in video games that I feel like aren't being met in a lot of the games that are or a lot of the new games that are being pumped out these days. And again, it also just be me playing the wrong games or not owning a console. That's also possible. Too many new games are safe. Yeah, I can see that. Um, oh, and the fact that we've also kind of hit this kind of like remake, remaster, porting era of video games where it's a new game, but it's not a new game because it's trying to revive an older franchise. And then those are the games that get all the attention and all the funding. Which, don't get me wrong, I love the fact that like the younger generation gets a chance to play a version of this like classic title if it happened for like some other RPGs, so like if Chrono Trigger ever had like a remake, well, a modern remake, um, I think that'd be really cool, and that would give me more incentive to go out and play it because that is one of the games that's been on my bucket list forever to actually get around playing. Chrono Trigger is perfect as is. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying that for some of the younger generation, that style of game does not appeal to them. It's just a thought is all it is. But then those kids need to get off my internet lawn. Maybe they do. Maybe they do. Honestly, it'd be they need to go and you know to a real lawn and touch grass. But yeah, I have a lot of things that I want to put in games and a lot of stories that I want to tell. Albeit a lot of the stories are really shit, but I never really like written them out. Dot Hack remake though, yeah, I would like it if they did make a pseudo dot hack theme game. Maybe not necessarily dealing with the like main cast, but something that's set in that same world that you can play with friends. That would be kind of a non-canonical story rather than just a canon story. I think that would be fun, but again, that's just me spitballing. The world, just as the game, yeah, would be neat. Because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, hey, we made a game about this medium that portrays a game. And it's like, well, what if we just had the game as a game rather than the game that's a game that is a story about a game? You know? Just cut out the middleman. But obviously, some people just want to play through the story in a video game format, which, from my experiences, I can't really think of a game where that was particularly well aside from the dot hack games. I feel like every other game that originated as a separate medium typically did not entice me or engross me as much as dot hack did. I could be greatly, vastly overlooking some titles, but just from my immediate thoughts off the top of my head, um, I don't think there's anything like that. Anyhow, another game in a game. I mean, I can think of one, and it's one that really boosted anime popularity in America, and I don't like it. I just one that isn't isekai like Digimon, right? Because technically, Digimon is not a game. It is literally just another world, which is always a funny thing. Because retrospectively, you didn't. Retrospectively, it is an isekai. It just didn't have the word attached to it because it wasn't popularized. There are some Digimon games where you start playing a game in the game, right? Then you get sucked into that game, just I think there was a Game Boy one that was like that I had a long, long time ago. I never beat it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I didn't even own it. I think it was a friend's or some random person's, and I just kind of like yoinked it for a bit until I lost it. That sounds about right. That sounds about par for the course for young me. It's happened more than I would have liked, where I've taken a game and then lost said game later on. It's kind of bad. I remember I lost my first Nintendo DS when I was traveling to go see my father. Well, when I was coming back after seeing my father, I lost that and I was very sad. Very, very sad. That was like the original DS too, the one that had like the weirdly beveled like top screen. Anywho, we we're more than ready to move on. So let's go ahead and pop this thing open and just kind of move on here. Viewing party. So yeah, basically, if I make changes in the
into our game level, it's this little cube right here. In the last lesson, we added a piece of script onto the character so that if I go
yeah.
ahead and I'm
So
going
basically,
to
if
select
something
the
does require
location,
me
which
or
of course my little blocks
to
right
kind
in
of
the
like
middle,
make
I can
changes
go
in the
ahead and
game, then
press
I'll
the
just
up
go ahead
and
and like
down
pause
arrow
the
keys
video,
and
swap
the
screens,
right
do
and left
so
arrow keys
live.
and the space
But
bar. I can
basically,
make my
gonna be more of like a
character
watch party
move
kind of deal.
forward and back, left and right, as well as jump. In order to do that, we added a little character into our scene, which I named Steve. And on Steve, I added
And
a
obviously, I'm not
code
going to be
file
recreating
called
everything he does, so
icon.
one to one,
Now, the
because
script
it's not
icon
really
is just a
necessary as
word
long as
from
the
one
lesson
word
itself
space
is
into the script workspace,
explanatory
where I can then go ahead
and the
and
goal
see
behind the lesson
all of the code that's on Steve. Now, this course is designed
is
for
apparent.
absolute beginners to programming, so in this lesson and in the next lesson, I hope to demystify a lot of what's going on in this code, enough so that you have an idea
Oh,
of
he
how to
actually just got
start
to explain
working
the
with it,
code.
following
Wow.
along with me as we work on this code and other pieces of code in this project to
I
make
mean,
the
this is
game
still
that we
good
want to make.
because a lot
So
of
without further ado, there are
the
5
math
things
behind
we
the
can talk about
physics
to get
is
us
something that I'm
going
not
and up to speed
quite
in the
familiar
wild
with because
world
I
of computer
didn't
programming.
take any physics
First up is
classes
language
aside from high school.
syntax. The word syntax means the rules of a language. GD script, and this is GD script 2.0 as of Godot 4. There's a new version of this language.
And again, for reference, here we have C sharp script, which is probably incredibly freaking difficult for you to read. Hold on, can I zoom in on this? Oh, I can. There we go. Yeah, so between this and this, some slight differences, but for the most part, they're basically written the same way. But one of the things that you will note is that um, over here, you'll see no semicolons at the end of the lines. You'll see no brackets to separate everything. And a lot of the structure is very similar to, like I mentioned before, Python, which is another coding language, which for anyone who's not familiar is a really easy and more readable coding language for anyone who's getting started with it. So um, if you're picking up code for the first time, I'd recommend just using this GD script or Python if you're doing more general programming and not just Godot programming. Otherwise, you'll be like me and probably just stick to one of the more traditional programming languages that also runs off of inheritance. So extends is the inheritance. Interesting. I mean, I guess it makes sense because I think Python does the exact same thing. Anywho, back to the video.
Language, the first thing you should know is that this language is case sensitive. So if you type the word velocity, and that is a very important word as you're making your character move in your game level, it matters if you type velocity with a capital V or a lowercase v. Likewise, if you say is on floor, you must capitalize it exactly in the way that Godot or GD script expects you to. The next thing is
Okay, so that is another thing. Is um that is another one of the learning curves about doing game development is that the game engine that you are using will typically have built-in libraries, and those libraries will have pre-made functions that handle certain logics and interacts with the engine as a whole. And so that is on floor is not something that is generated within this file. That is just an inherent part of Godot. And so that is the part where it's like you have to be familiar with the library, which is why having the whole online docs thing here handy is super important. And it's a good thing that they have it like easily accessible and you're able to search it and everything. Um, because that is what the bulk of programming in any game engine is going to be like is learning what exists in their library. Now, there is a lot of translation between the various game engines, and so if you learn one to a sustainable degree, a lot of this other stuff will just come almost intuitively. It'll probably tell you like, oh hey, no, it's supposed to be separated. It's supposed to be snake case, or it's supposed to be camel case, or it's supposed to be used this type of wording. Um, those are just going to be things that you learn over time with your particular game engine. So that will probably be one of the bigger gripes I will have whenever I do go about actually writing my own code for Godot, is figuring out what already exists and do I not have to worry about versus what do I actually have to manually code for myself. And so there are some like interestingly enough, templated scripts that can be auto generated for basic things. So this file, for example, is completely 100% auto generated, except for the part where I did this to simulate ice physics. But yeah, he's gonna go over this, so I guess you guys can just sit tight while this is going on. Doo doo doo. There we go. And back to the watch party.
Tabs or indentation. GDScript, like the language Python, expects you to indent or tab
There.
very precisely. You can
Just
see
mentioned
in the
it.
code editor right here, on the left side of many of these lines of code, you see a little tiny symbol. It looks right like that, and it means that there has been a tab typed right there. So if you do not tab in, if I delete this tab right here on that line of code, the code will no longer work. You can see it's complaining at me with lots of lines of red highlight. It does not like that. You must tab exactly as GDScript expects. So I'm going to go ahead and press tab, not spaces. It must be the tab key on your keyboard to make it work. Common characters. In GDScript, you're going to see lots of characters that you wouldn't normally write in everyday English, like colons. Colons come at the end of some lines. You're going to also see round brackets or parentheses. You're going to see periods or dots between different words, and those are important to have. And you're going to see symbols which are called operators, like the equal sign. You'll also probably see
Another thing, if you guys ever do have questions about things that are happening on screen or in the code, just type out a comment and I'll read it and hopefully I can answer your question. Because obviously this is a learning opportunity for everyone. And so if you're interested and you think you might want to try and do more programming things, or later on if I happen to be doing more Blender things, and you're interested and you want to know more, I can give you at the very least my perspective, if not like a concrete answer, if it's something that I would be able to answer in a black and white fashion. But just wanted to kind of remind everyone.
somewhere here or there symbols like plus, minus, times, and divide. Those are all going to be found in a programming language like GDScript. Last up, you're going to see lots of keywords used again and again in a language like GDScript. You're going to see words like function or func. You're going to see things like const, which means constant. You're going to see words like if, else, as well as not. And pay attention to the capitalization of all of those aforementioned words. Before we move on to our next point, though, I'm going to have you actually follow along with me and create a new object in our 3D scene.
Oh no, it's an ad.
It's made very, very cool
Ah,
media.
I'm allergic to ads.
So I'm going to jump back over into the 3D workspace here, and I'm going to select the root node of level 1, and I'm going to press plus to add a new type of node that I haven't mentioned before, and that is going to be found under Node 3D, under Visual Instance 3D, under, if I can get this little prompt to hide itself, I'll click on something else, under Geometry Instance 3D. It is called Sprite 3D, and it's going to be under this little subcategory, and it's called Sprite 3D. It's probably easier just to search for it, Sprite, and there it is, Sprite 3D. We'll go ahead and double click to add one of these into our scene. A sprite 3D is simply a flat image that you can add into your 3D scene, and it'll show up essentially as a plane or a flat surface which you can rotate and position anywhere you want in your 3D world. So if I select that sprite 3D and go over to the inspector, it has an empty texture slot right here. What I'm going to do is actually just use the Godot icon, which Godot actually gives us down here in our file system doc. It's called icon.svg. If I have my sprite 3D node selected and I drag icon.svg into and let go of it right above that empty texture slot, I'll let go. You can see now it shows up right there as a resource that we've plugged into the texture property, but it's also now in our game level right there. And I can go ahead and move it up, and I'm going to move it forward on the z-axis so it's a little bit closer to my camera. If I go ahead and save this scene, Control S, and I go ahead and press play scene, you can see now that it is a flat
Can I play this
surface
scene with a
on my game
warning?
level that does not act as a physics object. It's just there visually, which is nice. The reason I'm
I don't
adding
think
this
it
into the
likes
game
that.
level is because we're going to do a little bit of coding,
Oh,
and you
nope.
can actually
There
try
we
some
go.
coding for yourself on this sprite object. I'm going to go ahead and rename it though. I'm going to call it, by double clicking on it, I'm going to call it icon, like that, okay? I'm going to go ahead and select that node, and I'm going to press the add script button. And when we do that, we can leave everything as the default. It'll name this code file the same name as the node itself, so icon.gd, and I'll press create. When I do that, Godot now opens up that code file in the script workspace, and we can start typing code. The next big topic of this lesson is variables, data types, and constants. What are these? Well, if I go ahead and jump back over to Steve's code, so I'll just simply click on Steve's little script icon right here. You can see that at the top of Steve's code are a couple of variables. Actually, they're called constants, which hold data that Steve needs to know in order to move around. What are variables? Well, back when I was in grade 2, my grade 2 teacher in a math lesson taught me that there are some types of math questions where you actually get given the answer, but the question itself might be something like 3 plus triangle equals 7. And therefore, triangle equals what? You're given the answer, but you're expected to fill in one of the blanks, in this case, the value of triangle. Now, later on in later grades, like in middle school and high school, we got used to not using shapes like triangles, we got used to using letters like X and Y, and those values are called variables. A variable in computer programming is like a box that can contain a piece of data. And that's exactly what a variable is in computer programming, except the box is actually like a piece of memory that can hold
You guys say
data in
data
your
or
computer's
data?
RAM, or random
I say
access
data.
memory. In GDScript, in a code file, I'm going to actually now go back over to my icons script file by clicking on the little icon right here. You can add new variables into your
Is
code
that a
so that
yes to
your
the way
code
I
can
pronounce it, or is
remember
that a
things that
yes
it needs
to
to
you
remember
pronounce it
for a
both
little bit
ways?
later on. An example of this might be if you're creating a game where you're collecting coins in the video game, kind of like we're going to do in this game project, you would need to create a variable to keep track and remember later on how many coins you've collected so far as you're playing the game. So at the top of my code, actually right below where it says extends sprite 3D, you can ignore that for now, I'm going to click and type the keyword var. Var creates a new variable. When you make a variable, you have to give it a name, and these names cannot contain spaces, and generally they should not start with numbers, and they should not contain special characters like dollar signs. So I'm going to name this variable coins, and I'm going to assign it a value by using the equal sign. I'm going to say 5 and press enter. There we go. It looks red right now, but the red disappears, and that means that GDScript is likely happy with that line of code. We've created a variable that holds a simple whole number.
All right, I'm just hopping over here real quick. Again, so something like this would probably just be. And actually, you could probably just simplify it to being and call it coin. If it doesn't like it, then it could, you know, do mean things. Interesting that this doesn't have color. Why is that? It's just completely void of color. I mean, let's see if it compiles. I mean, supposedly has no issues. Hmm. Oh, right. This thing doesn't. Right. Because last time I kind of noticed that was going to be weird. And so I was thinking about just switching it over to be Visual Studios. So Microsoft Visual Studios. So that way you can actually have some of the conveniences of an IDE, which would be the whole autocomplete and things like that. Yeah, I don't know why this isn't getting picked up. That's fine. This is fine. Or this is not fine. This is fine. Don't know why. Could not tell ya. We're gonna roll with it and pretend that everything's fine. Oh, and by the way, integer, integer, just basically means number. And we're gonna have a lot of decimals. That's when you use floats instead, which is why this is a float, because this is gonna have potentially a lot of numbers. Because it's gonna take in very minute details. But yeah, just some basic data types, which probably is going to cover that later. All right, here we go.
Called an integer. And that brings me to my next point, which is variables can hold different types of data. If I make a variable, and you can make as many as you want at the top of your code here, I'm going to make a variable called var name, and I'm going to assign it to, this time, some words. I'm going to say the name of this object is, well, it's a picture of the Godot icon with a little robot, so I'm going to type in robot. There we go. This variable, just like coins, holds a piece of data. However, this time the data is called a string. A string means words that you put in quotation marks. Now, some variables like coins work best if the numbers are whole numbers, which are called integers. However, you can make variables that hold numbers with decimal points as well. I can make a variable called, let's say, hearts. And you might be familiar with the idea that when you play some very famous video games, you can have hearts that represent your lives, and those hearts can be a whole heart or a half heart, and you might keep track of those numbers of hearts with a decimal point by saying equals, let's say, 3.5. That would work as well. This type of data is called a float. A float means a number that has a fractional value as a part of it as well, as opposed to an integer, which is only whole numbers. Oh, you know what? I've realized that I've actually used a variable name that I'm not allowed to use. It's giving me an error here on line 4. It's complaining at me because the word name is actually already taken. I can't make a variable of my own called name because my node, which I have this script file on, already has a built-in variable in its code called name. So I might want to use a different variable name. I'm going to say player underscore name.
Okay, so that's another thing that is going to be um kind of weird thing to try and get used to is that there's going to be, because of these inherited objects, some of these variables are going to be explicit or they're going to be reserved. And so they're already going to have usage somewhere else in the code. And so if for character body 3D, if we search, can I do this? Does this work? No. Oh, this does show all the classes. Well, let's see if we character body 3D. Oh, cool. It does open in here. So it has all these different properties with all these different names attached to it. Does this inherit from anything? Physics body 3D, but that's not a huge deal. Actually, it might be. And so get floor, so it calculates things that are on the floor, what angles, and I can get all of these values. And then it has built-in functions to check is on floor and whatnot. It's neat. And then obviously if I click on any of these, it'll bring me right to it. A little blurb about, hey, this is what happens. Um, yeah. So those are well and good. But as you can see here, we have velocity that is already an inherent property of character body 3D. And so if we go back to here, Um, when we're using velocity, we are specifying that we're grabbing this particular type of velocity, setting that velocity. So I'm guessing capital velocity V is applying it, presumably. Unless this is part of physics body 3D with a capital V. No. Eric's collision body. I'm actually really like how it does say what inherits it, because that's actually kind of useful. Yeah, so all of these just inherit it that way. Oh, what it is that okay. So actually looking at this, the fact that this is character body 3D, the fact that this is velocity with a lowercase v, this is what the code would look like if I was writing it in um if I was writing it in GD script. Since I'm writing in C sharp, this would actually be capital F, no underscore, capital B, no underscore, capital O, no underscore, and capital W. So I'll have to keep that in mind when I'm actually looking at these documents. Is there a way to switch these over to be GD script default by any chance? Mm, maybe there is, but uh, yeah. So that'll be a thing that I need to keep in mind. And so similarly for these would be camel case instead, or I guess Pascal case. Yeah. All right. So got what I wanted to say out of the way. Going back now.
And that should fix it. Okay, so sometimes there are words that you can't use, like if or else or func, that Godot already knows about. You have to come up with your own words for variable names. Okay? Now, one of the neat things about variables is that you can change them later on. Later on in your code, if you have a variable to keep track of how many coins you've collected, and that variable has the value 5 assigned into it, well, later on, if you touch another coin and collect that coin, you can change its value. When you want to access a variable later in your code, you don't have to say the keyword var all over again. You can just say the variable name, like coins, and make it equal to a new value, like 6. And that would be perfectly valid if I had put that line of code somewhere where it makes sense lower down in my code. And don't worry, after these next few lessons, this lesson and the next one, you'll understand where you'd have to put that line of code for it to actually work. But just know this is a valid line if it was somewhere else. Okay? If we go back to Steve's code though, you'll notice that there are no examples of the keyword var. If I go back and click on Steve's little script icon, you can see that there are variables declared up here at the top. However, they have the keyword const. So what is that all about? If I go back to
Const.
my icons code, let's go ahead and create one of these. I'm going to say const, and I'm going to give this variable a name of speed. And I'm going to make it equal to 2. What is this all about? Well, a variable is a piece of data in your program that is meant to be changed later on. If I have a game where I collect coins, then I'm creating this variable at the very beginning of my game. And then later on, hopefully the player actually collects more coins. And that means that this variable's data, the number assigned into the coins variable, hopefully that number will change. And that is possible with a variable. However, there are times in your game programming where you want to create a variable and ensure that it will never ever change as the game is running. This is called a constant, and that's what the keyword const means. In GDScript, you typically name constants with all capital letters, and that's why you see that over in Steve's code. Whereas if you create just variables, as I did for my icon with coins, player name, and hearts, you don't have to use capital letters. Do you have to do this? Do you have to name constants with all uppercase letters? No, you don't, but it's what's called convention. It's what other programmers expect you to do. So to make sure that everyone uses the same standards, you probably should do that as well. Just a couple more things about variables before we move on. The first thing is if you want to access the data inside of a variable, all you have to do in GDScript is use that variable's name. So if I want to make a new variable called x, I'm going to say var x equals. If I want x to equal coins, well, I can simply access the 5 that's in my coins variable by saying coins. And what this means is that my variable x will get the value of 5. If I want to make it one more than coins, in other words, I want x to be coins plus 1, I can do that. I can say coins plus 1. If I want to combine multiple variables together, let's say I want to make x equal to coins plus speed, even though speed is a constant, they're both integer types of data, 5 and 2, so I can say var x equals coins plus speed. Why would I ever do that? I don't know. This is an example, but you'll see things like this all over the place in GDScript. Okay? Lastly is that the type of a variable, the data type that you assign to a variable, like var coins is being assigned the value 5, which is an integer, is dynamic. And what does that mean? Well, coins right now has an integer value assigned to it, but later on, if I want to make coins be a different type of data, like a string, words with quotation marks, I can do that. I can say coins equals Fred. And when I do that, and if I type it correctly, coins equals Fred, that would be a valid line of code, again, if I put this in a proper location, not at the very top of my code. We'll get to that a little bit later in this lesson. Okay, so I'll go ahead and delete that line of code. Next up are operators. Operators are symbols that perform a simple action. You can already see examples of two different operators on my screen right now, and they are the equal sign as well as the addition operator, which is plus. Symbols that do something in code are called operators. The equal sign is actually not called equals. The equal sign is called the assignment operator. And how the assignment operator works is the value on the right side of the equal sign gets stored or assigned into the variable that's on the left side of the equal sign. So you can see on the very top line of my variables on line 3, I'm assigning the value of 5 to the variable coins, and it's being put inside of that coins box, if you will, or more precisely, the location in memory where coins is being stored or pointing to, the value 5 is being put in that location. So the equal sign is called the assignment operator. We can use the plus sign for addition, which is called the addition operator. We could also use minus or times, which is the asterisk key, which is normally Shift 8 on most North American keyboards, I believe. There is divide, which is a forward slash. So now you know how to use plus, minus, times, and divide, as well as the assignment operator. There are more operators. We'll get to them as we go, but you should know that term, operators. Next up are comments. Comments are little notes to yourself as a programmer that you include in your code,
I'm
but
very
they
bad
don't
at writing
count as
comments,
code and they don't mess up
especially
your
if it's
otherwise
something
valid
confusing
code
because I just want
when
to
you
be done
type
with
them.
it.
When you type
It's a
a
very bad
comment
habit.
in
I need to make
GDScript, that line needs to begin
actual
with a
comments
pound
that mean
sign or
something.
hashtag. When you type a pound sign or hashtag, you can then type whatever you want after that symbol, and it's just a convenient little note for yourself to help you describe what's happening in that section of your code, especially if your code is many dozens or even hundreds of lines of code long. You can see that in this default code that we got on our icon, there are a few comments that describe the two sections of the code that we've been given. This section, called func ready, is called when the node enters the scene tree for the first time. What that means is this section of code is meant to only run once when the icon first loads into the game, essentially when the game level first starts. This section of code is called on every frame. Delta, this value right here, which is
Oh,
a
there we go.
variable, is the elapsed time since the previous frame. You don't need to know what that means right now, but essentially this section of code runs at 60 frames per second again and again and again. So any code that you put there will run very, very rapidly again and again and again. on Steve's code, if I jump back over to Steve's code right here, you can see that they've documented what's happening in this code using comments. So on this line 7, we have a descriptor right above it in a comment that says, get the gravity from the project settings to be synced with rigid body nodes. In other words, our game character has a variable called gravity, which we're not giving a number to just in the code. This code actually jumps into the project settings in Godot, where under physics and 3D physics, there is already a default gravity value. It's 9.8. And so we're not typing 9.8
Is it
here, or it isn't
9.8
typed
meters per
for us here.
second? Is
It
that
goes into the
the
project
unit of
settings
measurement
so that your
for gravity?
character actually falls with the same gravity that the physical block
Been a long
objects
time since
fall
I've done
in our game
physics.
level at the same speed of gravity. You can
It's
see
almost been
comments
10
throughout
years since
the
I've done
code that was given
physics.
to us for our character. If you read through it, add the gravity, handle jumping code,
81 meters per second,
handling
okay.
input from your keyboard to make your character move in the right
It's one
direction.
of those things where
And
it's like,
that's
that
pretty
seems
much
like the
it
most
for the code that we
logical,
have on
like,
Steve
units of
as it
measurement.
stands right now. It's a
Because,
good habit to get
doing
into as a programmer to write your own
kilometers per
comments,
second,
document what little
that
sections
seems
of
a little
code do.
intense.
Usually put a comment right
Meters per
above a
second
section of
squared,
code,
technically.
or if it's just one line that you want to comment, you can add a hashtag or a pound sign at the end of the line, and then you can write your own description. This line of code on Steve happens to actually update velocity, pushing it downward on the screen. Okay? Back to our icons code though, and the last topic of this lesson is calling functions. A function in programming is a little section of code
I
which you can
mean, it'd be
consider a
9.81
mini
times
program
10 to the
within
negative
your
3
larger
kilometers per
program.
second.
A function
Well, I
is
mean,
a
if you're gonna
small
go that
program
route.
that is meant to do one task. You can tell a function to run by calling that function. Where can you call a function?
Some
Well, you can
nice,
call a function to
neat
run
base
from either of
10s.
these two sections that I
Because
mentioned that
God
we have by
knows
default
conversion in
on our
Imperial
icons
is
code.
fucking
So either when we
atrocious.
first add our character into our game level, which is when our game first starts, when we press play scene, or we can run a function
I
60 times per
totally
second
agree.
in
Base
this
10
section called
is
function process
amazing.
delta. Now, don't be confused
Base
between functions
freedom
that
units
we are
is
actually writing ourselves and the content of
it's
in
not
our code
it.
file. There are actually functions all over the place already built for you into different parts of GDScript, including just global functions that you can call from anywhere.
Maybe if I
Here's the
was
simplest
just
one. In this section of
like
our
a
code
plain
called
American that had
funcBreak,
zero
I'm going to
interest
replace
in
this
any other
line that says
country,
pass with a function call to
I'd be
print
perfectly fine
something
and happy. But
onto the
because
screen.
I
There
actually
is a
care
global
about,
function called print.
other
And when you
countries and
call the
cultures and
function,
they
you
use
write
those
its name.
metrics and it's like
You then have to write parentheses or round brackets. And in this
kind of
case,
hate the
the
way that I
print
learned
function will print text or symbols
how to
into
count
the
and all
output
that,
dock when you play your
or
game.
it's how to
What do I want to
measure
actually print?
and
Well,
all
every
that.
programmer, when they learn a new language, always creates a new program called Hello World. So I'm going to type in quotation marks the text Hello World. When I do that, and if I save my code file, Control S, because this function
Actually,
is
out of
being
curiosity,
called
is this?
when the icon first loads into the game, when the game is running, when the game first starts, if I press the play scene button right now with my level 1 tab active, I'll
The
go
only
ahead and
thing I
press play
like
scene.
reading this for
You
is
will see
height,
that my game runs, but that one line of
because
code printed Hello
six
World into my
6 foot
output dock,
versus
which is
5
this
foot
tab
11
right here. I can
means.
hide it and I can show it. There it is, Hello World. I'll go ahead and press stop. If
Oh,
I were to
those.
move that print line, so I'm going to select it and cut it, I'll press Control X on my keyboard. You have to actually go ahead and add the word pass back onto that line so Godot doesn't complain at you. Just trust me on that one. If
Hmm.
I go ahead and paste that line, Control V right there. Again, make sure you are tabbed one in for both of these lines. That's important. If I go ahead and press play
That is
scene
one thing I
right
do
now,
find
I'll do a
annoying
Control
about
S to save first. I'll press
indentation
play
based
scene.
languages.
My game will launch and you can see the game is running, but it's printing Hello World 60 times per second. If I go ahead and close my game, you can see if I scroll, it printed Hello World a whole lot, 60 times per second. We are calling this print function We are giving it an argument. An argument, or sometimes called a parameter, is when you give that function some data that it needs to know how to do its job with. Like, what is it going to print onto the screen? You have to put that in the round brackets. Can you put other data in the round brackets of print? Yes, you can use variables of any type. If I want to print out coins 60 times per second, I could simply type coins right there. I could
So
save,
he has
I can press play
autofills.
scene, and you can see it's printing 60 times per second on my screen.
Interesting.
Are there any more exciting and relevant functions that we can use and call that will actually make our little
Sag.
sprite in our 3D world actually do something? You bet. If I go back into my script workspace onto my icons script,
Right, my
60
sippy
times per
sips.
second, I'm going to call a function called rotate underscore y. Now you'll notice that as you're typing code, there will be a little helper pop up that is auto
False.
predicting for you what
Not
you
if you're
want to
using
type.
C
And
sharp.
you can use the up and down arrow keys on your keyboard to highlight and select the one that you want if you don't want to
Actually,
keep
that is a
typing it
thing
for
that I am
yourself.
curious about. Um, Godot predictive give code for C sharp. So one of the things that I'm looking into is the fact that there was no linting of that nature in Godot for C sharp, but
Itself, you can
it's
simply use
whatever.
the down arrow key, select rotate underscore y, and press enter. Rotate y is a function. It's actually called a method. I'm not going to get into the difference between functions and methods.
I'll be 100%. I'll be 100 with you. I use functions and methods interchangeably 100% of the time.
Those two words are synonymous as far as you need to know in this lesson at this point in your programming journey. We are calling a function or a method here called rotate y, and it needs to know the angle at which we want to rotate our sprite 3D called icon 60 times per second. Now, this rotate y function needs an argument or a parameter. It needs an angle. Now, you might think of angles as being in degrees, as in 360 degrees makes a circle. However, this function requires a value in radians. Now, I'm going to type, just to see what happens, 0.1 radians. If I go ahead and save, and then I select my level 1 tab, and I press play scene, you should see that your little sprite 3D is spinning on the y-axis. Y runs up and down as your game runs, again 60 times per second. If you change the argument value from 0.1 to 0.05, well, it'll rotate slower. So if I press Control S to save, make sure level 1 is my active tab, and I press play scene, it runs or rotates at half the rate. Can I use a variable to determine?
Now, of course, we have to take that to the extreme just for memes. So, here, added it, and of course I had to change the thing. So where it was lowercase rotate underscore y, I changed it to the Pascal case of rotate y, because that's how the conversion between C sharp and Godot is. So that's something useful to learn today. We're all set, and so this should do the thing that we just saw, literally verbatim. Aha! I broke the thing. What'd I break? What is this? Print does not exist. Interesting how print doesn't exist, but it still keeps it. So what if I do this then? Nah, it just doesn't like it. That's fine. Wasn't really doing anything. That's a good lesson, kids. If you don't like something, just delete it from existence. Look at it spinning. All right. Now we gotta make it spin real fast. Let's just make it 10. See what happens. How fast it's spinning, boys. Now that's fast. But it's a little simple, a little simple. So well, let's go run it along the x-axis. So we're gonna go ahead and rotate it on the x as well. Just for a little extra spice to it. We're gonna also rotate that. Actually, you know what? We're only gonna rotate it on point 0.1. 0.1. Just start it off nice and easy. Oh, you can't even tell. Like, it's slightly wobbling? Well, you can't even tell. Alright. Which tells me we need to kick this up a notch. Gotta balance out the forces. Look at it go! Chaos. Alright, and then, there's a third axis because this is Godot 3D. So we have to hit up our last axis of 10. And since we already know we need some extra spice to get things moving and go for 10 right off the get. Right off the rip. Alright. Now that's spinning. See? Isn't it nice to just be completely unhinged and unchecked? Full control over everything. Anywho, enough of that. Back to the lesson.
The speed of rotate y instead of typing in 0.05 myself? Yes, I can use that constant speed. So I'm going to type in, matching my capitalization here, speed, all in uppercase. And if I press Control S to save and I press play scene, well, my little sprite 3D rotates very, very fast. What if I want to use degrees instead of radians? Well, there is a function for that. There is a little function, a little program that does one little job for us. It converts degrees into radians. So if I want to rotate 60 times per second this little sprite in my game 2 degrees and not 2 radians 60 times per second, I can call a little function right inside of these parentheses called deg or degrees underscore 2, and you'll see it prompted for me right here. So I'll just press enter on my keyboard. This function is called degrees to radians or deg to rad. And what you can do here is type in a degree value. I'm going to type in speed, which is 2, and it'll convert that value in degrees to radians and put that value right here. And then we're giving that new value, which is 2 degrees converted into radians, to the rotate y function as its argument or parameter so that it gets the radians value, but we were able to type in a number that we're more comfortable with, likely in degrees and not radians. So there you go. We're calling a function and then getting a value back from that called a return value, and then we're giving that value to rotate y. There we go. I'll press Control S to save. I'll press play scene, and now our little character rotates 2 degrees 60 times per second. There we have it. And I think it's at this point that I've thrown a lot at you in this lesson. In this lesson, we've talked
Nah, I
about
wasn't that
language
much.
syntax, we've talked about variables, data types, as well as
Alright, did
classes.
everyone learn
We've
a
talked
thing or
about
two?
operators,
Some very
comments,
basics of the
and calling
programmings and
functions
what you
or
can expect
methods.
from
Well,
coding
I
in
think that'll
general.
be it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Ah! I accidentally clicked on a thing that I didn't mean to click on. Alright. Anywho, so that's the gist of that, right? Now, as for things here that I wanted to actually do, let's just go ahead and finish up that last bit that he had. So, degree to rad. I'm just gonna pop that in and assume that. Oh, I don't have a speed. Public constant. We're just gonna do speed. 2. What I'm typing? Speed. The mouse. The agrees to rad doesn't exist under that context? That's interesting. Alright, so then if that's the case, then what if we open up the documents, agree to rad. And here we have a search result. Is it actually just going to be dag to rag in C# as well? Again, like it doesn't tell me that it's wrong. In fact, it just highlights it as though it's recognized. But I guess this is just a general function recognition rather than actual. Let's try this. See if that nets me what I'm looking for. Does not. Interesting. Search for help. If I could search methods, that'd be really helpful. Global scope. And so we have this. And that looks like it should be it. But it's not. So, unless... Is it rad or rad? It's just rad singular. And it takes into degrees. Yeah, no. That seems like it should have been it. And the thing is, it doesn't give me like, oh, did you mean, or does not give me any sort of autofill, no predictive text or anything because I'm using C#. So if you're going to be doing Godot and you are not familiar with programming, probably just stick with Godot or the GD script. It'll probably be significantly easier. And then you can just transition from that to any other more traditional uh, programming language later on. Okay. So let's see. It would be nice if they did have a separate library between the two. So what if we do C#, Godot, degree rag. Differences. Oh, do I have to do Godot object dot or math dot? Is that how that's gonna work? So I guess down here, degree the rad, I have to do math f. So is it specifically called the math? Interesting. Okay. Does it recognize it now? It does. Curious then. In the event I haven't been doing a lot of math, those are just, let me use this library. Nope. Dang. I'll just have to remember to manually insert that anytime I use one of the math functions, which means this is actually a really nice page to have. Yep. Oh yeah. This is necessary. Badly needed. Again, not the worst thing ever having to manually go to get some of these by mentioning they're like, I guess, the namespace from which you would ordinarily get these from. But I wasn't wrong. The naming scheme was exactly as I anticipated. Oh, right. Print. Using static Godot GD. So GD print. Oh, is that how I use it? So if I go instead, do dot math f. Does that work? No. I thought maybe, just maybe. You know, we got GD. GD will get me the whole print. BRINT, and we'd say, hello, Warudo. Warudo. Ugh. Clicking on things I don't intend to click on. Ha! I forgot the semicolon. Ha! It doesn't like the namespace I'm using. Really? I also hate how this is how it ellipses and it doesn't just GD is not a type, it's not a namespace considered using static. Oh, is that why? Using static. Curious then. Duplicate. Oh, I can't duplicate using that shortcut? Okay, that's fine. See if it yells at me for math F again. Because I'm curious now. Because I didn't actually look at the error the last time, so I'm wondering if this changes it. It does! Okay. So I just have to remember that if I have to use static whenever declaring more of a namespace. So same thing for like the string expressions. Blah. Or was it extensions? I don't know. I don't remember. Whee! Into the void. See, now you guys can't tell if I'm moving back and forth or not because you have no perspective to gauge the relative change in my position. Yeah, so that's all that, and I guess the only other thing that I was curious about, and this was something that I just kind of like do on my own. Not that. This I want to see collision or not collision. I want events. Signals. There we go. Because basically, yeah, I'm going to need to learn how to do the whole event handling process for Godot. But that will be a problem for a later me. So, things you guys might have learned is the whole general programming, how that looks and what it can feel like. Whereas I learned how to more effectively use the Godot docs and um, just the general how to maneuver around using the namespaces, which is still good. Still good. I definitely need to be better about putting in time outside of this to go look through those documents and actually try to work on things. Because like we discovered before, one of the things was to um, I should probably add friction as a different thing. Um, one of the things I was going to look into was how to set the events so that if I'm on a certain type of flooring, it causes a trigger to change the player's friction level, which would then be able to simulate that this portion of the game is ice, whereas this is not ice. So make one side slippery whenever the person is on it, and then make it normal whenever they're not on it. So something like that, and just kind of not really something that I have like a concrete goal, like oh this is what I want to happen in the game. Just a general. This is a thing that would teach me a skill that is kind of a core means in game development as a whole. So that's the goal with that. But I have done just about everything I need to do there. So let's go ahead and read. Uh, uh. Looks like Highland raids. Yeah, we're gonna go raid Friendo because he's playing Final Fantasy, which is what I should be doing. But you know me, such a gamer. Ah. But anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed today's stream. Again, not exactly a stream for everyone, because some people just want to see game, Pokemon, Rage, a variety of things that may not necessarily fall under the category of educational purposes. But if you did, thank you for hanging out. Do appreciate it, and hopefully by like January, I'll have something a bit more presentable that you guys might be able to interact with more. And I'll have some better foundations for what a game could look like. That would be the goal. As for how fast or how slow I'll get there will depend on my own self discipline to make sure that I actually do um like work outside of just the stream. But the stream is a very nice way for me to kind of kick myself and be like, hey, I gotta do something, huh? And so, which is the goal. That was kind of the goal of why I wanted to stream this type of content. And then later on, once we actually get something rolling, these were more or less turned into kind of like a devlog and whatnot. But the next time we'll be live will be Saturday, unless something happens. But I'll let you guys know. But I will see you guys then. Bye bye.